Welcome to the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Recruiting Show. And week number 2 is a busy week. Here's a look at what we are going to be talking about in the next few minutes. Big storylines. McDonald's All-American announces the rosters for the 2023 game. We're going to be bringing in Eric Bossi, a selection committee member, to help us break down those rosters. That's going to lead to a conversation about one Bronny James. Of course, the eldest son of LeBron James, has been in the news lately, and not just because he made the McDonald's game, but because Dad has been fairly outspoken about his future. We're also going to talk about another guy with a major following since he was a youngster, and that's Imani Bates, who went off recently for Eastern Michigan. And then we are going to preview 2 upcoming commitments, as Elijah Moore and Tahad Pettiford are both ready to call their recruitment to an end here in the class of 2024. The McDonald's All-American Game is the highest honor in all of high school basketball. And on Tuesday, the 2023 recipients were announced. Now, whenever the McDonald's rosters get announced, it comes a certain amount of debate that goes along with it. So, to talk about that, we are going to bring in National Basketball Director Eric Bossi, who is a committee member himself. So, Ebos, I'd like to go on record as saying this is not my fault for once, and you got some things to answer for, Lucy. So, in the 24 hours since this has come out, what did you think was maybe the biggest storyline of this year's roster, or even the biggest surprise?
You know, whenever the game gets announced, there's always a bunch of people who are upset about this guy making the game or that guy not making the game. And the fact of the matter is, no matter who makes it, there's always going to be someone who feels like it's left out in the cold. But
right.
Obviously, a major storyline is the inclusion of Bronny James. Everyone's excited about that, with him being the son of LeBron, and the debate of did he make it because of his name or did he make it because he earned it. You know, a big storyline to me is DJ Wagner, who is the first third-generation McDonald's All-American. His father, DeJuan, was a McDonald's All-American back in 2001, the first McDonald's All-American game I attended as a member of the media.
Wow.
And his grandfather, Milt, was a McDonald's All-American back in the early 1980s. So that's pretty special.
Yeah.
But with always, it's good to talk about. You know, Kentucky has 4 guys on the team. Duke has 3 guys on the team. They're the top 2 ranked recruiting classes. No surprises there. It's just always a lot of fun to talk about.
All right, now, the stuff that we really want to talk about, though, who made it and who didn't. You talked about Bronny. I think, you know, the ones, if you're going by social media, and as we know, that can be just a trap of negativity. But, you know, the names that I've heard the most in the last 24 hours, Bronny James, obviously, we'll get to him later. Brandon Garrison is a guy who's, you know, top 50 prospect in the country, one of the most efficient big men, but I think he's a little bit of a surprise to some people. And Reed Sheppard also made the game, one of those Kentucky commits. Reed, from a rankings perspective, he's not a top 25 guy in the country, but when it comes down to his resume to date, I don't have any issue with him. So let's start with those 2 guys. You know, what was the, and I know this is a blind ballot, correct? Like, you don't know what other people voted for, and they don't know what you voted for. Is that right?
Correct. It's a blind ballot where we've got several rounds of voting where, you know, we have here, give us your top 100, give us your top 50, 40, whatever. And what's without giving up too much of the way of the voting process.
Come on, man.
As these rounds are going, we're not only doing like our top guys, but they're asking us to do it by position, which, as you know, today's positions aren't necessarily a traditional center, power forward, small forward. So it's relying on voters like myself in some cases, and I don't know how much everyone else does this, to take guys and kind of maneuver them around positions that they could play in order to fill out the roster of me ultimately getting the best guys I think deserve to be in the game, right? So in the case of a guy like Brandon Garrison, there's a few other outlets that have him ranked a little bit higher than us. So by our rankings with him at number 52, it might look at us like a surprise, but someone else might have him 29 or 30. So it's not as big a surprise. So he's a composite top 40 guy, but he's a center.
Right.
And in a class that's already weak enough as it is, it's particularly weak at center, and we have him as a top 5 center. So to see a top 5 center make the game isn't necessarily a huge surprise. But for people who don't understand how the voting process goes, you can be like, how do we get here? And my guess would be that maybe there's some people in the voting process that really don't want to move guys around, that are traditionalists about like, okay, this guy's listed in this position. This is where I'm going to vote for him with it. So you've got that factoring into play. And then a guy like Reed Sheppard, I mean, it's a story. He's going to Kentucky. His parents played at Kentucky. When it comes down to it, and some voters, those types of things may matter. I'll say frankly, he was not on my final ballot. There were a couple other guys that did make the game that were on my final ballot, but that's how it goes, and I can't make everyone's vote for them or explain anyone else's vote.
And I respect that you own that your ballot. I think that is when the people who do have that influence share what they voted. I think transparency is always the best policy. Kudos to you for that. Let's talk about the guys who didn't make it, and obviously every year there's going to be some guys who feel like they should be in and they just don't make the cut for whatever the reason. Travis Branham wrote about these players on 247sports.com. We should also mention that the players for OTE were not eligible for this game. So players like Robert Dillingham were not eligible to get in, so that automatically took him out of the equation. To me, the biggest surprise was Caleb Foster. I know he hasn't had a great high school season, but he was incredible this summer. I mean, I think he was if not one of the leading scorers at Peach Jam. He's committed to Duke. I've seen the argument that Bronny James got in because of how well he played this summer. Well, if that's the case, then that should have applied to Caleb Foster as well. So Caleb Foster would be, to me, the one guy that I was surprised, or I should say the top guy that I was surprised didn't make it. Was there anyone who stood out to you in terms of saying, I was surprised he didn't make the cut?
Caleb Foster is an interesting one that you bring up because, internally when we were discussing updated rankings, I was maybe not quite as high on Caleb as the rest of the staff after seeing him this winter. I don't think he's had the strongest winter. I think he's been a bit inefficient and has gone from a playmaking point guard to a guy who's hunting offense a little bit too much. But I did have him on my final ballot because I felt he deserved it more than some of the other guys. Now, I do not think that Bronny James took his spot as far as the discussions go. I'm not going to get too deep into who those last final discussions came to, but Bronny James was safely in before we got discussing Caleb Foster and maybe a couple of the other guys at the end. So I don't think this is a case of him stealing his spot in particular. Theoretically, if you don't think Bronny was in, he stole somebody's spot. If you don't think Brandon Garrison was in, he stole somebody's spot. The name that really jumps out to me, and I know I may be on an island with this one, is Dennis Evans.
That is your
7-footer from out of Riverside, California. I know he's not everyone's cup of tea. He's a developmental big man. He's a little bit of a throwback big man, but I've had the chance to watch this kid develop from a young age to where he is now. And I really do see a guy who's eventually going to end up in the NBA, and a guy that I would have really liked to see in the McDonald's All-American game because of his rim protection, because of his emerging skill, ability to step out and hit shots at 7'1". And I just think it would have been fun to have him in there and to have a guy who kind of bucks the system. He didn't play for a big shoe company team. He didn't go all these camps and stuff like that. And it just would have been fun. But, that's how it is. He didn't make it. The other voters didn't see him. And so that's what we've got. We've got to go with who makes it, and we're going to make the most of it once we get there.
All right, let the record show Boss is the captain of the Dennis Evans fan club, and I am the captain of the Tayson Chapman fan club. Just want to make sure that's documented for future generations. We are going to have much more on this, much more on Bronny James, coming right up in a second. Now, Bronny James isn't just a McDonald's All-American, but he's also been in the headlines for other reasons, mostly because Dad's been tweeting about him in the last couple of weeks. And it hasn't just been Dad. There have been other media outlets who have interjected their opinions. Some people raving about him, saying he's a surefire one-and-done NBA player. Other people saying he's mid-major plus. So to break it all down, we're going to bring back in Boss and talk about Bronny James. Now, Boss, I think you and I are in a similar place on this, but we were literally sitting next to each other 2 weeks ago at Hoop Hall, and Bronny James didn't have a great game. I think he was 4 of 17 from the floor. He did some good things. He can always impact the game without needing to score the basketball. I think that's one of the best parts about him. But the level of praise he received after that event relative to that shooting performance, I thought was disproportionate. How did you feel about that?
I agree. He shot the ball well in that game from deep. He was pretty good from three-point. I think he was 3 for 8, so that's good. And he was very good defensively, which is always a trademark of his game. But to watch a guy go 4 for 17 and be part of a team that crumbles and blows a 10-point lead late in the game to a team of primarily sophomores, particularly Cameron Boozer, our number 1 player in class of 2025, I'm not sure that's the moment you start going off about, hey, this kid is a potential one and done. Now, if that's your feeling and you're promoting this based off over the course of the season, that's fine. But I just didn't think that moment was the moment to go touting him as a one and done guy. And I really don't think it's fair to him. And I don't know if that's just influence from nobody wanting to be pitted against LeBron in the media, because certainly
that's real.
We all deal with this. These are teenage kids, and it's always tough when people say they tweeted us like, how can you have this guy ranked here? How can you have them ranked there? And they're like at the kid in it. Yeah. And it puts you in an awkward position because we're talking about a 17 or 18-year-old kid who didn't get asked to get dragged in it. And now we're talking about not just a regular dad or like an uncle or something. We're talking about possibly the most powerful man in basketball,
right,
who can really frame how things go. That's a slippery slope to get in. And I get it. LeBron's a dad like everyone else. He's supporting his son. But I think it's on the media. If you feel that way, that's fine. I think Bronny definitely has a chance to play in the NBA. I don't know if I think he's a one and done type guy yet, but if that's your opinion, that's fine. But I just think we need to be careful about when and how we're presenting that opinion. And we got to do that because it's got to be fair to Bronny.
And how much of this comes down to media members wanting to have a rapport with LeBron, wanting to have a rapport with Clutch, and kind of sticking to the script in order to maintain those relationships? We're getting into speculative territory with this, but let me not put that on you. I think that's got to be a factor in some of these. And then I think on the other side of the spectrum, there's other people who are overcompensating, saying, I don't even think he's a high major player. I mean, my stance on Bronny has been pretty much the same all along. I think he does a lot of things that can impact winning. I just don't think, and this is counterintuitive because he's LeBron James' son, I just don't think he's like the alpha playmaker. But he can make shots. He's a heady passer. He's got a really strong body. He's evolving athletically. He can be explosive with the wind at his back and the open floor. He plays both ends of the floor. So I think he's got all the tools to impact winning. But if you've never seen him play before and you're coming to see LeBron James Jr., it's very unlikely you're going to see him go for 30. So to see some of this stuff, the way it's being portrayed, I think just to me, it has to be rooted, at least in part, in wanting to either develop or maintain those relationships with LeBron and the people around him. That's just a theory.
There's certainly maybe something a little bit to that. I can see that. But also it's just, let's face it, we're all in the business. People talk about clickbait, right?
Yeah.
I'm a person who feels that any article we write is theoretically clickbait. We don't tweet things. We don't write articles for people to not read them, right? So people are looking for engagement, and Bronny James is like engagement gold, right? And so,
but if you're selling out for engagement, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like,
right. That's, I don't like to do that, but I'm not going to begrudge someone. And, like you say, it's speculation. I'm not as much of a speculation guy. I'm more of a I know for sure guy, but certainly some of those things could be at play. But at the end of the day, what I think it does is if you're going to be in this, have an opinion and be able to back it up and say, hey, this is where I'm coming from on this. And, know that there's going to be some flexibility to change what you're thinking as time goes on. But don't just do things purely because, if I phrase it like this, it'll take off. Or if I phrase it like this, they'll like me more down the road. So maybe it'll be a little bit easier to score that interview with Bronny when it comes time to go. Now, I'm a purist. I like to think that people aren't doing that, but I also know it's the real world and maybe there is some of that going on. But, I just always like to tread lightly in those type of waters.
Yeah, no, I hear you and I respect it. But I think the other part to this is how outspoken LeBron has been. Not just recently. I mean, the tweet most recently ended with "he's a pro." There was another tweet that kind of acknowledged his influence and ability to pick up the phone and get whatever he wants done. But going back years now, he has said kind of the last thing, and this is a guy who's about to break the NBA scoring record. But he said that the last thing, and I'm paraphrasing, the last thing to accomplish is to be on the court with his boy. And I think he's even cited like Ken Griffey Jr. and his father being on the baseball field together. And so that, one of the things, let me say this. One of the things that impresses me probably most about Bronny James is with all the eyeballs under the microscope, given even, dad saying, I want to play with you in the NBA, like he's plays the right way. He plays composed. He plays to win. And that maturity that comes through between the lines, I think, is something that we don't necessarily talk about enough and is one of, if not the most impressive things about him.
100%. It's always been an impressive thing to me. The first time I went to see Bronny play was out in Las Vegas a few summers ago when he was between 7th and 8th grade. The hype was going crazy. He was playing with Mikey Williams and Rayvon Griffin and all these guys. And they were, had literally hundreds of people waiting outside to get in that couldn't get in because the games were so crowded. And even then, seeing the way that he handled himself as a 13 or a 14-year-old kid with all this hustle and bustle of attention around him was really remarkable. And that stayed the course. For a kid who's under as much public scrutiny as he is, he's been remarkably clean. He doesn't have any blow-ups on the court. He always shows up. He does his job. I think a buzzword in basketball now is connector. He's a connector on the floor. He makes the pass ahead. He does the little things to do things versus going out there and kind of being the man. But the maturity with which he carries himself is really remarkable, but it's also not necessarily a surprise. I mean, let's face it, his father is one of the most remarkably polished media presences we've seen. As he's gotten older and he's gotten more clout, he's certainly been a bit more outspoken. But LeBron, from a media standpoint, has been, everything you could have ever possibly hoped for a kid who came out of high school and then some. What he's done in the media and how he's projected himself and his ideas and his thoughts. You couldn't ask for anything more. So it's not a huge surprise to see that a kid who grew up watching that has retained some of that. And what I'm looking forward to is the thing we haven't gotten to do yet is we haven't gotten to hear Bronny speak. We've seen it in a couple commercials. We've seen some of his personality, but I want to hear what Bronny has to say. How does he feel about dad saying, hey, I'm going to play with my son before I retire? My son is a pro. Bronny may think all that. He may be on board with all that, but does he feel pressure because of that? Does he go home and does he go home and like, Dad, what are you doing, bro? You did it to me again. These are the type of things that I would love to know. I would love to know from Bronny, hey, there's speculation about this school. Hey, this is the school whose coaching staff I speak to on a weekly basis. This is the school who's come in to see me these times. These are the things that I think are the next evolution from just dad speaking for him and unintentionally putting even more pressure on a kid who's already under a lot of pressure. Let's see what he's got to do. But to your overall point, how he's handled all this is remarkable. And as the father of a high school junior myself, I think about if she had to handle this type of attention, and it's comical to me to think about how she would be doing with it. And to see the way Bronny is handling it, it's really remarkable.
All right, now speaking of young prodigies, of course, Imani Bates, he's almost become a cautionary tale of sorts. And we were all, myself included, guilty of really laying out the hype very high, very early. But early on, he was that good. I mean, 15 years old, he was as good of a 15-year-old player as I've ever seen. I mean, I've said it multiple times and I can't deny it. But the pressure that created for him has really been an unfortunate next chapter. Now, this week, we saw a revitalization of sorts, and basically the whole basketball community, including LeBron James himself, celebrated on social media when Imani Bates scored 29 straight points in the first half, finishing with 43 for the game. So again, going to bring back in Ebos to talk about this. Ebos, you and I both have watched Imani since he was, I think he was 14 years old in that USA Basketball Junior National Team minicamp in October of his freshman season. We've seen the ups, the downs, the burdens of the expectations. But it was just a lot of fun to see him get it going again this week. And I know you wrote about it the next morning on 247sports.com.
Yeah, here's the thing. Imani Bates, I think the greater basketball community, we're all rooting for this kid to make it, right?
100%. Yep.
We saw the talent. We see what he's been able to do in spots this year, not just the 43 points the other night. He had 30 when they nearly upset Michigan to begin the year. He had, I think, 36 against South Carolina, the other high major opponent they've played. So he's had these flashes. And the thing that we still need to remember throughout all of this is this is a kid that's going to turn 19 years old this weekend. Right. He's a baby. He's just a baby deer. He's still growing and he's figuring things out. And what we're seeing lately is a guy moving in a positive direction. And no, maybe he's not going to be a lottery pick right now. He's not going to be a number one pick. But he's establishing himself as a bona fide talent and a guy that NBA teams are warming back up to as a potential first round guy because as a 6'9", 6'10" shot maker, he's got a very defined role that's looking like he can come in and play in the NBA.
Yeah, I think it was Jonathan Wasserman from Bleacher Report made a great point morning after on Twitter, said so much of this is going to come down to the interviews. To your point about Bronny James, people also want to hear Imani Bates speak. NBA front offices are going to want to hear Imani Bates speak. But the talent is still immediately evident, and it's just a lot of fun to see him start to figure it out again. And to your point, I think everybody is absolutely rooting for him.
We've got a big commitment scheduled for Wednesday, February 1st. Is Todd Pettiford, the number 26 ranked player in the class of 2024, is going to make his decision. A 6-foot-tall point guard at Hudson Catholic. He's down to Auburn, Connecticut, Kansas, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Seton Hall to make his decision. Adam Finkelstein is here to preview what he expects from Tahad and something that we might look forward to seeing too on the 24/7 Sports Network.
Yeah, to me, Tahad Pettiford, he's always reminded me of Nick Van Exel. I'm not saying he's as good as Nick Van Exel, relax. I'm just saying he's got a similar body type, a similar game, undersized, kind of lean, lefty guard who can really shoot it, who can really handle it. He's a slick playmaker, and if you let him loose in the open floor, he can rise up and throw it down. He's got that level of explosive athleticism as well. So one of the most exciting playmaking guards in the national class of 2024, a scorer, a playmaker, and a shot maker.
While we're excited about the commitment of Tahad Pettiford, we've actually got one coming up ahead of time, and it's going to be this Saturday at noon on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Top 75 junior Elijah Moore out of Cardinal Hayes in the Bronx is going to announce his decision live with us. He's down to Alabama, Arkansas, Miami, Oklahoma State, and Syracuse, and I'm going to bring back Adam again to break down what Elijah may bring to the school he picks on Saturday.
Elijah Moore is, in my mind, one of the truly elite three-point shooters in the national class of 2024. Now, on top of that, he's got good positional size, a strong body, and he's got solid athleticism in the open floor. Everything else is going to come off his ability to make shots. Now, he's got to get a little lower to the ground as a playmaker. He's got to continue to improve as a ball handler, learn to make plays for other people. But let's not get this wrong. He is an elite shooter, and that is a special skill that translates up levels. So keep an eye out for Elijah Moore to continue to make a run as one of the best shot makers in the national class of 2024. Well, that's it for this week's edition of the College Basketball Recruiting Show. But before we go, a sincere note of gratitude to everyone who tuned in for week one. The viewership was more than we ever could have anticipated, and we are excited to continue to try and raise the bar and bring you unprecedented recruiting, college basketball, and NBA draft coverage all on one site. So visit us at 247sports.com on the 24/7 Sports channel, and we'll see you again next week.